Did she really just say that
so
on
great to
live
see you
television?
again.
The words hung in the air, sharp as glass, slicing through the
so
hum
great
of the
to see
studio
you
lights.
again.
Kaitlin Collins blinked, the kind of pause that says more than words ever could. Across from her, Representative Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. The tension wasn't just in the air, it was electric, humming through every watching device across America. The studio audience held its breath. Viewers at home felt their pulse quicken. What began as a routine political segment had detonated into something far bigger, a moment that would define the night, and maybe the year. Crockett's eyes didn't waver. She wasn't just answering a question. She was answering a country's quiet doubts about who gets to belong, who gets to speak, and who gets to stand tall without apology. Collins leaned forward, a journalist torn between control and disbelief. The air trembled with this sense that something irreversible was happening. And then, Crockett smiled, calm, certain, dangerous in her poise. The next word she spoke would ignite timelines, trigger think pieces, and send shockwaves through both sides of the political divide. But what happened next silenced even her critics. This wasn't just another interview. It was a collision between two visions of America. On one side sat Kaitlin Collins, the polished face of mainstream media, carrying the unspoken weight of institutions that claim neutrality while shaping the nation's narrative. On the other, Jasmine Crockett, sharp, unbothered, and unapologetically herself, represented a new wave of leadership that refused to play small for anyone's comfort. Outside the studio, America was tense. The election cycle had turned every headline into a battlefield, every social post into a test of loyalty. Issues of race, gender, and identity weren't just political topics. They were personal fault lines, splitting families, workplaces, entire communities. The air was thick with fatigue and cynicism, but beneath it pulsed a quiet hunger for authenticity. People were tired of sound bites. They wanted soul. That's why this exchange mattered. It wasn't about a single policy. It was about who gets to define the truth. Viewers could feel it in the pauses, the glances, the subtle power shifts on screen. Crockett wasn't merely answering a journalist. She was standing up to a system that had too often spoken for her, not to her. In living rooms across the country, hearts raced, fingers hovered over share buttons. The country was about to witness something raw, something unscripted, a moment that could redraw the lines of what leadership looks like. And as the cameras rolled, Collins leaned in, ready to challenge. Crockett exhaled, ready to rise. No one yet knew that within minutes the tone of the entire conversation and the balance of moral authority would flip before their eyes. To understand the storm brewing in that studio, you had to understand Kaitlin Collins. To the casual viewer, she was the image of composure, a rising star in political journalism, polished in tone and armed with credentials from the nation's elite. She spoke the language of objectivity, but beneath the measured cadence was something colder, sharper, the certainty of someone who had never truly been questioned. For years, Collins had made a career out of holding power accountable, yet her record told a quieter story. She pressed the vulnerable harder than the powerful. She'd interrupt the emotional but yield to the entitled. And whenever the conversation turned toward issues of race, class, or justice, her voice would tilt just slightly, subtle but unmistakable, as if saying, "Be careful, you're stepping out of line." It wasn't hatred, it was hierarchy, the kind that wears a smile while drawing invisible lines. She'd weathered criticism before, comments about tone, bias, selective empathy, but her confidence remained unshaken. She believed she understood America better than those who fought for its margins. She believed she could control any interview, any guest, any truth. But arrogance has a way of blinding even the sharpest minds. As Crockett's reputation rose, Collins viewed her as another headline, another chance to prove her mastery. A viral exchange, a clean takedown. That's what she saw when she looked across the table. What she didn't see was that this time the script wasn't hers to control. There was irony in it all. Collins had built her career on exposing others' contradictions, never realizing she had become one. She preached neutrality but wielded bias. She called it journalism, but it looked more like performance. And as the debate began to heat up, something imperceptible started to shift. Her questions grew sharper, her smile thinner. The facade of control began to crack, ever so slightly. Viewers watching could sense it, the quiet unraveling of a narrative that had long gone unchallenged. In living rooms and group chats, people started whispering the same thought. How does this person still get away with it? They wouldn't be whispering for long, because before the night was over, Kaitlin Collins, the arbiter of truth, would find herself facing a truth she could neither edit nor escape. Before this moment, few knew what Jasmine Crockett had endured to stand beneath those studio lights. The sharp suit, the calm composure, the unwavering gaze, none of it came easy. She wasn't born into networks or influence. She built herself, piece by piece, from the quiet defiance of someone who refused to stay invisible. Long before she carried titles or microphones, she carried responsibility. Growing up in Texas, she watched her parents work impossible hours just to keep the lights on, just to prove that dignity doesn't depend on wealth. She learned early that the world listens differently when your voice comes from the margins. Still, she spoke anyway. Every classroom debate, every late-night study session, every community meeting was practice, not just in argument, but in courage. Law school came with its own bruises, professors who underestimated her, peers who saw confidence as arrogance. But she didn't fight for validation. She fought for the people who couldn't sit where she sat. When she later became a public defender, she carried their stories into every courtroom. The single mother accused because she couldn't afford a lawyer. The teenager written off before he even had a chance. Crockett knew injustice not as a headline, but as a daily haunting. That's what made her different. She didn't enter politics to chase the spotlight. She entered to hold it steady on those long kept in the shadows. Every insult, every sideways glance, every doubt only forged her steadier. So when she walked into that CNN studio, she wasn't there to perform. She was there to represent, to remind a country teetering on cynicism that public service still meant something, that truth could still come from those who had been told to wait their turn. And as Collins prepared her next question, sharp and precise, Crockett wasn't nervous, she was ready. Ready in the way only those who've walked through fire can be. Because when you spent your whole life being told to stay quiet, speaking truth isn't scary, it's freedom. And that's why what she did next hit harder than anyone expected. The air in the studio tightened like a drawn bow. Collins leaned forward, voice clipped, eyes sharp. "So, Representative Crockett," she began, "you talk about fairness and representation, but don't you think you're playing identity politics instead of real policy?" The phrasing was surgical, crafted to sting. A few gasps fluttered through the audience, the kind that come when a question crosses the invisible line between curiosity and condescension. Crockett didn't blink. She let the silence stretch, her stillness louder than any rebuttal. Then she smiled, a small knowing curve that made Collins shift slightly in her chair. Collins pressed again, faster now, trying to regain control. "It sounds like you're saying people should vote based on race or gender rather than merit. Isn't that divisive?" The words dripped with the confidence of someone used to setting the frame, not being inside it. But Crockett's calm was unnerving. She met Collins's gaze, unwavering. "Merit," she said softly. "You mean the kind that only counts when it looks familiar." A ripple moved through the room. The crew exchanged glances. Even Collins hesitated, her practiced poise flickering for half a second. She tried to laugh it off, twisting the question into a joke about wokeness fatigue, but the timing was off. The audience wasn't laughing, they were listening. The contrast between them was cinematic. Collins agitated and cutting, Crockett steady and unbothered, her tone almost tender in its restraint. Every time Collins interrupted, Crockett waited, patient, deliberate, until the interruptions became the story themselves. Somewhere behind the cameras, a producer mouthed, "Keep rolling." They could feel it too, the tension transforming into something irreversible. Crockett leaned back slightly, voice low but clear. "The problem isn't that we talk about identity," she said. "It's that some people only hear it as a threat." The studio fell utterly silent. Even Collins stopped, words catching before she could reload another question. Then, with a single sentence, she flipped the entire room. For a long moment, no one moved. The lights hummed above them, the cameras unblinking. Kaitlin Collins sat back, lips parted, searching for the next angle. But something had shifted. She wasn't steering anymore. Jasmine Crockett's calm wasn't submission, it was control, earned and deliberate. Crockett let the silence breathe. The power of the pause was hers now. When she finally spoke, her voice carried not just volume, but gravity. "The word identity," as she began, "gets thrown around like an accusation. But the truth is, identity has always shaped this country. It shaped who wrote the laws, who enforced them, and who got punished by them." A few murmurs rippled through the audience. Collins blinked. The rhythm had changed, and she wasn't keeping time. Crockett continued, eyes locked on her interviewer. "When I talk about identity, I'm not talking about division. I'm talking about recognition. The recognition that for some of us, equality isn't a theory, it's a survival strategy." The camera panned slowly, catching faces in the audience. A young woman nodding, an older man frowning, a producer frozen mid-note. The entire room leaned in, as though gravity itself had shifted toward Crockett. Collins tried to interrupt, "But surely you'd agree that—" Crockett didn't raise her voice, but it cut clean through. "Merit doesn't disappear when you acknowledge injustice. It disappears when you pretend injustice isn't there." The line hung in the air, perfect in its simplicity, devastating in its truth. The audience reacted like a wave, a soft murmur followed by the unmistakable sound of spontaneous applause before the producers could even signal for it. Collins smiled tightly, trying to recover. "Representative, with all due respect." Crockett leaned forward slightly, tone steady, eyes unwavering. "With all due respect," she said, "I've spent my entire career watching people who look like me give more respect than they ever receive. So tonight, I'm not here to debate my right to be treated equally. I'm here to remind people why that right exists." Gasps, the kind that come from recognition, not shock. Collins's practiced neutrality faltered. Her next words stumbled, softening into something almost human. "That's a powerful point," she admitted, voice low. Crockett wasn't finished. "It's not power," she said. "It's lived experience. I don't have the luxury of pretending politics is a game. When policy decides whether your community eats, breathes, or survives, the conversation looks different. We don't chase controversy, we chase change." For the first time, Collins looked unsure. The glint in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a flicker of humility, or perhaps exposure. She glanced toward the cameras, then back to Crockett, realizing the narrative she'd built was slipping away, live and in real time. Crockett's voice softened, carrying the weight of history. "People ask me why I don't get angry when I'm dismissed or mocked. But see, I grew up knowing something anger can't teach you. Dignity. Dignity is refusing to let someone else's ignorance rewrite your truth." The audience fell silent again. The energy in the room had turned reverent, electric, almost sacred. Even the camera operators seemed to move slower, as if afraid to break the spell. Then, in one final surge, Crockett delivered the blow that would echo across timelines and screens. America isn't great because of who gets the microphone. It's great because every time someone tries to take it away, there's another voice, louder, braver, freer, ready to speak anyway. Silence. Then a pause, real, unrehearsed, thunderous. It wasn't the applause of an audience watching a show, it was the applause of people witnessing a shift. Kaitlin Collins, the journalist so used to commanding the frame, could only nod, a faint, uncertain smile flickering beneath the stage lights. She wasn't the villain in her own mind, but tonight she had been confronted by a truth that no amount of polish could deflect. Crockett leaned back, the faintest glimmer of peace in her eyes. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't attacked, she had simply spoken her truth, and the country had listened. And somewhere, deep in that silence between applause and disbelief, the story had already begun to change. By sunrise, the clip had already taken on a life of its own. What began as a single exchange in a studio now pulsed across every timeline, every feed, every group chat from DC to Des Moines. Someone posted it with the caption, "This is how you speak truth without shouting," and within hours it had racked up millions of views. #Crockett Moment trended at #1. Journalists tweeted cautiously, trying to reclaim the narrative. Powerful exchange between Collins and Crockett raises questions about tone and modern politics. But ordinary people didn't need analysis. They felt it. The moment wasn't about spin, it was about resonance. On TikTok, creators stitched Crockett's lines into cinematic montages, slow zooms, orchestral music, captions like, "Dignity isn't silence, it's strength." Late-night hosts replayed the clip with reverence, calling it the most composed takedown in cable news history. Even political opponents, careful not to praise too loudly, admitted the delivery was masterful. And beyond the headlines, something quieter began to happen. Teachers played the segment in classrooms, parents showed it to their daughters, community organizers shared it at meetings, saying, "Watch how she didn't lose her cool, watch how she won without shouting." It wasn't just a viral moment, it was a cultural recalibration. After years of noise and outrage, people were hungry for composure that carried conviction. Crockett had reminded them that fire could burn quietly, that power could wear grace. For the first time in a long while, politics felt human again, not rehearsed, not transactional, real. And that realness cut through the cynicism like sunlight through smoke. As the network scrambled for follow-up interviews and the memes rolled in, one truth settled in the public imagination. This was more than a debate, it was a declaration. America hadn't just watched a politician defend herself, it had watched a woman redefine strength on her own terms. But while the world applauded, one question lingered beneath the noise, a question Collins herself couldn't escape. If one moment of truth could ignite a nation's conscience, what would happen when the rest of that truth finally came to light? In the days that followed, Jasmine Crockett's words were replayed, not just as a viral highlight, but as a quiet anthem. Commentators tried to dissect the strategy, the poise, the phrasing, but what lingered wasn't analysis, it was feeling. The kind that settles deep, where people carry their unspoken hopes. Crockett stood before reporters a week later, her tone measured, her message unshaken. "This wasn't about me," she said. "It was about the kind of country we want to be, one that listens before it labels, one that leads with empathy instead of ego." Cameras clicked, but the moment didn't need spectacle. It was the simplicity that struck hardest. Because this wasn't just about her, it was about all of us. About the teacher who refuses to give up on underfunded schools, the nurse who stays for one more shift, the immigrant family who believes that belonging isn't granted, it's earned through hope and hard work. It was about the quiet courage of people who build, who serve, who keep showing up even when no one's watching. Crockett had turned confrontation into reflection, victory into invitation. She hadn't humiliated her opponent. She had elevated the standard. Her restraint became her roar. Her dignity became her weapon. And in that transformation, people saw a blueprint for something America had almost forgotten: decency as strength. As the segment faded from trending lists and into memory, one truth remained: courage doesn't always look like defiance. Sometimes it looks like grace under pressure. Sometimes it sounds like a calm voice cutting through the noise to remind a divided nation of its better self. And somewhere in living rooms and offices and classrooms, people whispered the same realization. If she could hold her ground with that much grace, maybe we all could. The moment began with disbelief. Did she really just say that on live TV? And ended with something far greater, a reminder that truth still has a pulse in public life. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win an argument, she reclaimed the tone of the conversation. In a time when shouting feels louder than substance, she proved that dignity still cuts deepest. Her composure wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a collective one, proof that calm conviction can still shift the culture. Because every time someone like her refuses to shrink, the space for all of us expands. If you believe dignity still matters, share this. Share it because strength deserves to echo. Share it because decency deserves the spotlight again. Moments like this don't just go viral, they go forward. And the next chapter of that story, of courage, grace, and truth, is ours to write.